This lecture deals with James Madison's presidency. He's our fourth president. He will serve 2 terms, taking office in 1809 and leaving in 1817. So we don't spend too much time talking about Madison's first term between 1809 and 1812. We focus on 1812 and on because that's when the War of 1812 happens. So you can see you can surmise at least he has a relatively successful first term because he is reelected in 1812 with the majority of the electoral votes. You can also see that there is a clear divide in the country, that the southern states are voting for the Democratic Republicans, the northern states are voting for the Federalists, and Maryland is a divided state because it's kind of on the border of the two of them. So we're seeing a divide in the country, that sectionalism that George Washington attempted or told us to avoid. It was somewhat unavoidable because of the different livelihoods of each of these groups. Madison will be for war in 1812 and will get us there. Most of the North will be against war because it is with Britain, one of the major trading partners. So just some background to Madison. He's born in 1751, so he's relatively young when the actual American Revolution breaks out in 1775-76. He enlisted in the Continental Army. He was actually too small to serve. He's the father of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. He served as Jefferson's Secretary of State, and he will deal with some of the issues that Jefferson and previous presidents left him during his terms in office. So one of the first issues that any president will have to deal with in American history is Native Americans. So Madison is going to deal with a man named Tecumseh, who's a Shawnee warrior, and his brother Prophet. They form a union of tribes east of the Mississippi to fight white intrusion. So they're trying to stop the Americans moving west, especially now that we've purchased Louisiana. They're supplied by the British with guns, and it led to this Indian cultural renewal where they feel like they can take back what they have lost to the white man. So in 1809, General William Henry Harrison, who's going to be a future president, is appointed governor of the Indian Territory by President Jefferson. Obviously, this is an interesting move. We're appointing a governor or a general to be a governor of this Indian Territory. President Jefferson at the time has strict instructions for Harrison to convince Tecumseh to stop attacking American settlements. It does not work, and it continues into Madison's presidency, and it leads to the War of 1812 because it's the British who are arming these people. They'd be less likely to be able to attack us if they are not armed by the British. So Tecumseh and his brother Prophet really drum up support by asking questions like, sell a country, why not sell the air, the clouds, and the great sea, as well as the earth? So that plays into that Native American philosophy of not necessarily owning everything. So again, as we talked about in Period 1, some Native Americans did believe in that, but Tecumseh is arguing for not to own things. Did not the Great Spirit make them for the use of his children? All children, Native Americans and whites as well. So Tecumseh says this as he's trying to draw up support for Native Americans to fight back. And he reflects on Native American history where he says, we gave them these mountains and these wonderful things, and they gave us rum, trinkets, and death, showing that obviously there's some animosity between the Native Americans and at that time the English colonists and now the Americans, which is why they will unite with the English as we saw in the American Revolution. They thought the English might help them more than the Americans would. So other issues that lead to war, the English continue to attack us and impress us. So again, the French also are continuing this, but to a lesser extent. So the U.S. Is pretty mad mostly at the English because they're taking our ships and impressing American sailors and American soldiers. So we talked about at the end of Jefferson's term, he passes the embargo of 1807. In 1809, Madison replaces it with the Non-Intercourse Act. So it says that we could only not sell to the British or the French. It will also be replaced by Macon's Bill number 2. So you're seeing we're trying different things to avoid war as we have since Washington, but it's not working. So you can see we're in 1810, the next year, we're going to try another thing. Macon's Bill number 2 forbade trade with Britain and France, but it offered to resume trade with whichever nation lifted the neutral trading restrictions first. So France quickly changes its policies against neutral vessels so that the U.S. resumed trade with France but not Britain. And you can see this is going to be a big step towards war because we will trade with France but not Britain. They both want to trade with us, but they both want us to not trade with the other. So the English are going to be quite upset by Macon's Bill number 2 and the French reaction to it. So this war is pretty divisive in America. There were several people in the South mostly that wanted it. We have John C. Calhoun and Henry Clay want war with Britain. They want us to be able to defend our neutrality and stand up to a bully, kind of. They wanted it to stop impressment. Destroying the U.S. economy was not exactly what they wanted it to do. There were still British forts on the soil of the United States, even though we dealt with it in 1783 and later in Jay's Treaty. Tecumseh is attacking Western settlers. We also hope that maybe if we went to war with Britain, we might get access to Canada and take it over. And we consider the English as disrespectful. So these war hawks, these people who wanted war, mostly from the South, and they had several reasons as to why they wanted to go to war. So as the War of 1812 looms, New England states, many were Federalist aligned, did not want the war. The war hawks successfully convinced Congress to give Madison a declaration of war, and ironically, Congress was not aware that London had actually repealed the impressment policy 2 days prior to the declaration of war, but because of a lack of speed of communication, we don't find out until the war is already declared, and then we can't turn back. Again, impressment is only one of the reasons we were going to war anyway. So the names of war are sometimes significant. Most people know this as the War of 1812, just because that's when it starts, not really a significant idea. The Second War for Independence, we're still fighting off the issues we had with Britain after the American Revolution, and many Northerners and Federalists would call this Mr. Madison's War because he was seen as the cause of it, the biggest proponent of it. So the U.S. is pretty unprepared, which is why most former presidents were trying to avoid war with Britain, but we fight valiantly. We had an attempted invasion into Canada that fails, and the British blockade will hurt the U.S. economy, especially in the northern New England states that were against the war to begin with. So they kind of have, and I told you so, but you can see the blockade is also around Virginia and Maryland, and the port of South Carolina, where we're still getting a large slave trade, as well as in New Orleans that we had just gotten from the Louisiana Purchase. So this is going to hurt our economy during the war. The British will burn the first White House that we had in Washington, D.C., and Dolly Madison, the wife of the president, will take many pieces of furniture out and kind of preserve some American history through doing that. So those are some of the minor highlights of the War of 1812. So in the Battle of the Thames River out west, General William Henry Harrison will defeat the British, but he also defeats the British were fighting alongside Native Americans, and Tecumseh is eventually killed. So this person who had been a problem for Americans, and Harrison specifically, is killed during that battle. And as the British are burning parts of Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., Fort McHenry, which is in Baltimore Harbor, is destroyed and bombed, and the flag that flew there inspired the Star-Spangled Banner, the poem that eventually becomes the national anthem on September 13th, 1814, written by Francis Scott Key. We will also have the Battle of New Orleans, which is significant because it's a major battle where the Americans were not really supposed to win. There's 10,000 British troops that are trying to take control of this mouth into the Mississippi River as the war is kind of drawing to a close, because if they had it at the close of the war, they could negotiate to try to keep it. There's 4,500 U.S. troops led by a man named Andrew Jackson, and he successfully defeats the British. The irony of this battle is it's 2 weeks after the war ended in December of 1814, but they don't know that again because of lack of communication. It shows we're strong, and it shows that we're able to keep Louisiana as the Louisiana Purchase area after the war as well. So as I said, in 1814, we're already trying to negotiate a peace agreement before the Battle of New Orleans. In December of 1814, the war is considered a stalemate. Nobody's winning, nobody's losing. So we decide we're going to stop fighting. We return all conquered territory to the pre-war borders, and we recognize the pre-war border between the United States and Canada. So basically, or actually literally, really nothing changes as a result of the war. So the war isn't significant because we want a bunch of land or anything like that. There's other significances to it. So one of the significance is this is kind of the death of the Federalist Party. The Hartford Convention is this group of Federalists in the North who tried to talk about secession and try to get continued trade with Britain even during the war, so they're trading with an enemy. People find out about this, and the Federalists become extremely unpopular and will eventually die out as a result of this. So even though we don't win, we tie the strongest nation on earth, so we gain some respect. We came to accept Canada as a neighbor and part of the British Empire and stop trying to get access to it. Federalist Party comes to an end as a national force. Talks of secession and nullification set the precedent for what will later be used in in the Civil War with the South. We gain neutrality, and we kind of finally deal with the issues that were looming from the American Revolution. We can go and move west, and that's obviously bad for Native Americans. We start to build more factories because we were reliant on British factories. That wasn't working during the embargo period, so we start to build our own. We get Andrew Jackson and William Henry Harrison to become future presidents, and we start to go into this period of American nationalism known as the era of good feelings. Last but not least, Americans see themselves as, start to see themselves as more powerful, and even the British do as well. So you're seeing the War of 1812, even though insignificant in battles or outcomes, the major outcome is we feel better about ourselves, and we kind of prove to the world that we can stand up to the strongest nation on earth.